The roar of the helicopter blades sliced through the cold morning air, echoing across the private airfield outside Atlanta. A crowd of corporate elites stood gathered in their designer coats and expensive sunglasses, watching as a massive silver chopper gleamed beneath the rising sun. Near the landing pad, a woman in a crisp white suit, Victoria Hale, CEO of one of the biggest aerospace corporations in the country, laughed as she turned to the cameras. Reporters captured every word, every arrogant grin. Just a few feet away, behind the barrier, stood a man in torn clothes, his hands trembling around a cardboard sign. His beard was scruffy, his boots worn out, and the chill seemed to cut through his thin jacket. Most people ignored him. Some even laughed. But Victoria noticed him, and that's when everything started. "Fly this chopper and I'll marry you," she said mockingly, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd burst into laughter. Cameras clicked. A black homeless man flying her company's newest luxury helicopter? To her, it was the perfect joke. Cruel, humiliating, and unforgettable. But then, something unexpected happened. The man didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He didn't even look offended. Instead, he lifted his eyes to hers, calm, steady, almost hauntingly confident, and said softly, "You don't know what you're asking for." For a split second, something in Victoria's chest tightened. There was something in that man's eyes, something that didn't belong to the streets. Something disciplined, trained, dangerous. Within minutes, security escorted him away, and the crowd went back to their laughter. But that day, the wind carried more than the sound of spinning blades. It carried the whisper of a story buried deep, one that would unravel Victoria's arrogance, her company, and her entire life. She didn't know it yet, but the man she'd mocked wasn't who she thought he was. He had once built the very helicopters she now claimed as her empire. Long before that humiliating morning at the airfield, Victoria Hale had built her reputation on perfection, or at least the illusion of it. She was a self-made billionaire in the public eye, the Iron Lady of aviation. Her company, Hale Aerotech, dominated the luxury helicopter industry, selling to private militaries, oil magnates, and global elites. To the world, she was brilliance wrapped in beauty, disciplined, ruthless, unstoppable. But behind the shimmering facade, her empire rested on cracks she refused to see. Contracts won through manipulation, patents quietly stolen from lesser-known engineers, and a marketing machine that erased anyone who dared challenge her. For Victoria, image was everything, and power was her only currency. That's why, when she saw the homeless man standing by the fence that day, she saw nothing but another shadow of failure. She didn't know his name. She didn't want to. To her, he represented everything she had clawed her way above: weakness, poverty, and insignificance. Yet, when he looked at her, she had felt something almost electric, an unfamiliar unease. That man, Daniel Carter, once had a life that mirrored the very success she flaunted. Years before he stood in rags at that airfield, Daniel had been one of the most promising aerospace engineers in the U.S. Army's elite design division. He was brilliant, focused, and known for his ability to make aircraft safer, faster, and smarter. But he was also a black man working in a system that didn't see his brilliance, only his color. He designed a revolutionary stabilization system for military choppers, one that could save countless lives during combat flights. But his white superior, Colonel Marcus Hale, Victoria's late father, had taken credit for it. Daniel was sidelined, his name removed from every file, and the patent officially awarded to Marcus before Daniel could appeal. The system went on to become the backbone of Hale Aerotech's entire empire. When Marcus died, Victoria inherited the company. She built it into a billion-dollar empire, on the same design that had once been stolen from Daniel. For years, Daniel tried to fight back. He hired lawyers, wrote to officials, presented his blueprints. But corruption, bureaucracy, and systemic racism buried his voice. Eventually, his savings ran out. He lost his home, his health, and his family. His wife, broken by the struggle, left with their son. By the time Victoria's company went public, Daniel Carter was living in a shelter, his name erased from every archive that could have proved the truth. Still, he never stopped believing that one day, someone would hear his story. Now, standing outside that airfield, Watching Victoria boast about a new helicopter powered by her father's legacy, he felt a quiet fury burning inside. She didn't even know who he was. She didn't recognize the man her father had destroyed. As for Victoria, she left the airfield that day satisfied, unaware that her mockery had been captured on dozens of cell phones. The clip of her laughing at the homeless man spread across social media like wildfire. Heartless CEO taunts black homeless man. The internet turned it into a scandal. Activists called it racist. Investors demanded a statement. But Victoria didn't care. She issued a shallow apology and flew off to an exclusive gala that night, convinced the outrage would fade by morning. She didn't realize that somewhere out there, the man she had mocked was watching, and at this time, Daniel Carter had something she didn't: proof. For years, he kept an old USB drive hidden, containing original schematics, timestamps, and recordings from his Army days. Files no one else knew existed. Evidence that could destroy her company's legacy in a heartbeat. For now, though he waited, he wanted her to see him, to remember, to face what she'd built her empire on. Because Daniel Carter wasn't going to beg for justice anymore. He was going to fly for it, one last time. In the days that followed the viral video, Victoria Hale's world began to crack, one headline at a time. What had started as a joke became a PR nightmare. The footage, her sneering face, the helicopter spinning behind her, the laughter of the elite, became a symbol of corporate arrogance and racism. Social media demanded accountability. News anchors replayed the scene, dissecting every smirk. But in her mind, it was all noise. She'd faced scandals before. She believed this one would fade, just like the rest. People forget fast, she told herself as she stepped into her glass-walled office overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The world, however, wasn't forgetting this time. Behind the scenes, Daniel Carter watched the chaos unfold from an old public library computer. He saw her press statement, her deflection, her denial. Every word of it fueled his resolve. For years, he'd lived with humiliation, while the Hale family built a fortune from his stolen work. Now the universe had handed him something rare: visibility. People were finally watching her. He needed to make them see him. That night, Daniel walked to a homeless shelter downtown, where he had stored a small, rusted metal case in a locker under his bed. Inside, it was a USB drive, cracked on one side but still functional, and a worn photograph of him in uniform, shaking hands with Colonel Marcus Hale. The caption printed on the back read, "Project Falcon, 2009, Prototype Team." The next morning, Daniel uploaded part of the data anonymously to an aviation blog known for exposing corporate fraud. The files contained blueprint scans, prototype images, and notes written in his own hand, each page bearing military timestamps that predated Hale Aerotech's patents. Within hours, the blog post went viral. Homeless engineer claims he built Hale Aerotech's core technology. At first, few believed it. Victoria called it a fabrication. Her PR team dismissed the claims as a malicious conspiracy by online activists. But experts began to notice things. Engineers who had worked in defense manufacturing confirmed the formatting, the terminology, even the writing style, authentic. The story spread faster than her lawyers could suppress it. Suddenly, journalists were asking, who was Daniel Carter? When one investigative reporter finally tracked him down near the old Army base, Daniel didn't hide. He spoke calmly, without bitterness, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had once built dreams for the sky. He told them how he designed the Falcon stabilization system, how Marcus Hale took credit for it, how the system became the foundation of every helicopter Hale Aerotech ever built. Within 48 hours, his interview aired nationwide. Victoria's empire began to tremble. Stock prices dropped. Investors withdrew. Government auditors reopened old defense contracts. For the first time in her career, she wasn't in control. But something deeper began to haunt her: doubt. The name Daniel Carter scratched at the back of her memory like a ghost. She locked herself in her office late at night, searching through her father's old archives. At first, she found nothing: sanitized reports, rewritten histories. Then, in a dusty file labeled Project Falcon, she found a photo: a young engineer in uniform, smiling, standing next to her father. the same eyes that had looked at her through the airfield fence. Her heart dropped. She realized she hadn't mocked a stranger that morning. She had mocked the man her father had stolen everything from, the man whose genius built her fortune. Sleep left her that night. The next morning, she arrived at the hangar before sunrise, staring at the helicopter that had been at the center of the scandal. For the first time in her life, she didn't see a symbol of her success. She saw theft, betrayal, and legacy built on someone else's pain. Meanwhile, Daniel's life began to change too. Donations flooded in after his story broke. Veterans reached out. Engineers offered him work. But Daniel wasn't after money. He wanted the truth, full acknowledgement, public apology, and his name restored on the patent. When Hale Aerotech's board finally called an emergency meeting, Victoria faced a choice: settle quietly and bury the scandal, or face the truth head-on. Against her advisor's wishes, she did something unexpected. She called a press conference. At noon, cameras surrounded her headquarters. She stood before them, the same confidence, but a different face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw. "There are allegations against my company," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "and I intend to find out if they're true." The crowd erupted in questions, but she walked away, heading straight to her car. She didn't go home. She drove to the edge of the city, to a small shelter whose address she'd found in the reporter's article. That night, when Daniel returned to his cot, she was waiting there. The same woman who had once laughed at him, standing awkwardly between rows of broken beds and tired souls. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. The silence between them carried years of injustice, pride, and pain. Then she handed him a card with her private number. "Meet me tomorrow," she said softly, "at the airfield." Her voice broke just slightly. "There's something I need you to do." Daniel looked at the card for a long time after she left. He could still hear her laughter from that day. But now there was something else: remorse and curiosity. He didn't know what she wanted, or why she'd suddenly come to him. But one thing was certain: whatever was about to happen next would change both their lives forever, because the woman who had once mocked him was about to ask him to fly again. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over the same airfield where everything had begun. But this time, there were no cameras, no reporters, no laughter. Only the wind and the rhythmic clatter of rotor blades echoing through the open hangar. Daniel Carter arrived quietly, dressed in a donated jacket and boots that barely fit. He walked past the security guards, who had been instructed to let him through. His steps slowed as he reached a massive helicopter, the Hale Falcon X, the company's latest pride. The sleek metallic body gleamed beneath the dim light, the same aircraft she had once flaunted to the world as her creation. Across the hangar, Victoria Hale stood watching him. Her posture was still sharp, her white suit immaculate, but her face had changed. The cold pride was gone. There was something fragile in her expression, humility, maybe even fear. When their eyes met, Daniel saw it instantly. This wasn't the woman who had laughed that day. This was someone beginning to confront the truth. "I had them run the serials," she began, her voice barely above the hum of the engines. "Every line of code in this chopper traces back to a system called Falcon 1. Your system." Daniel said nothing. He walked closer, his eyes running along the body of the machine, every rivet, every curve. It was his design, evolved and polished, but unmistakably his. He touched the frame lightly, as though greeting an old friend. "I wanted to see it," he said quietly. "One last time." Victoria hesitated, then stepped forward. "I didn't know what my father did to you. I grew up believing he was a hero, that everything he built came from hard work. But now, I can't look at this company without seeing theft." Her voice trembled. "I can't fix what's been done, but I can start by telling the truth." Daniel's gaze softened, but there was pain in it, the kind that time never erases. "The truth doesn't erase the past," he said, "but it can free you from it." She nodded, swallowing hard. "That's why I asked you here. Tomorrow, I'm holding a public demonstration, the biggest event in our company's history. I want you to be there. I want you to fly this helicopter in front of the world. And then I want to tell them whose design it really is." For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Her words hung in the air like a test. The same challenge she'd once thrown at him in mockery, now reborn in remorse. Fly this chopper. Only this time, it wasn't meant to humiliate. It was meant to restore. Why me? He finally asked. Because you deserve to be seen, she whispered. And because I owe you that moment. The next day arrived with piercing blue skies, as if the heavens themselves demanded clarity. The airfield was filled again, this time not with laughter, but with anticipation. Journalists from across the country had gathered, waiting for Victoria Hale's official response to the allegations. Investors stood grim-faced, cameras pointed at the podium. When Victoria appeared, dressed in black this time, the crowd fell silent. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Before we begin today's demonstration, I need to tell you something. Something the world should have known years ago, she said. This company's foundation rests on the work of a man who was never credited, a man whose genius made our aircraft possible. His name is Daniel Carter. Gasps rippled through the audience. The name many had seen in headlines, now confirmed by the CEO herself. And today, she continued, voice trembling, he will do what only he can. He will fly the Falcon X, the design he created, as its rightful engineer. All eyes turned to hangar doors as Daniel stepped out, wearing an old flight jacket marked with a faded U.S. Army insignia. For a moment, the crowd didn't know what to make of him. The homeless man from a viral video, now walking toward the machine like it was an extension of his soul. He climbed into the cockpit. The rotors began to spin. The ground vibrated with raw power as the aircraft lifted, gracefully cutting through the air. Cameras zoomed in. Every movement was precise, steady, masterful. Victoria watched from below, tears in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't the face of success. She was a witness to redemption. As the chopper hovered above the crowd, Daniel's voice came through the intercom, calm and resonant. This bird was built to save lives, not build empires, he said. And today, I fly for every hand that was never credited, every voice that was silenced. Applause erupted. Some wept. Others simply stood in awe. When Daniel landed, the world was already watching. Reporters swarmed. Headlines exploded. Black engineer redeems his legacy. Victoria approached him through the noise, whispering words only he could hear. You gave me something I didn't think I could find again, truth. He looked at her quietly. Truth was always there. You just had to stop hiding from it. In that moment, under the roaring blades and flashing cameras, they both understood. This wasn't the end of the scandal. It was the beginning of reckoning. But as the applause thundered on, neither of them realized the storm that was still coming. The board's fury, the lawsuits, the powerful men who would do anything to keep the truth buried again. And for Daniel Carter, the fight for justice was far from over. The footage of Daniel Carter piloting the Falcon X spread across the world in hours. Every news network, blog, and social platform replayed the moment again and again. The homeless man who had once been laughed at by a billionaire CEO, now fly our aircraft as the truth came crashing down. To many, it was just a viral redemption story. To Daniel, it was freedom. For the first time in decades, he could breathe without the weight of injustice crushing his chest. The world finally knew his name, not as a victim, but as a visionary. But fame, he soon learned, didn't erase scars. Days after the flight, Victoria Hale's board of directors called an emergency meeting. What she'd done, publicly admitting corporate theft, triggered a financial earthquake. Investors were pulling out. Lawsuits flooded in. Her company's stock dropped nearly 60% overnight. She stood in the boardroom surrounded by men and women who once applauded her ambition, now glaring at her like she betrayed them. You just signed the company's death certificate. One of them hissed. Victoria looked around the room, her voice steady. No, I just stopped living a lie. She was voted out of her position within 48 hours. Security escorted her out of the building she had ruled for years. Cameras swarmed outside the gates, shouting questions about her downfall. But she didn't speak a word. She had already decided some things were worth losing everything for. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself in a world he barely recognized. Offers poured in from engineering firms, universities, even documentary producers. Everyone wanted his story. But Daniel wasn't interested in fame or pity. He declined interviews, choosing instead to work quietly with a group of young black engineers who had reached out to him after the scandal broke. Together, they founded a nonprofit called Skyline Initiative, dedicated to supporting minority students in aerospace engineering, giving others a chance he'd been denied. Still, one person he couldn't forget was Victoria. Weeks passed before he heard from her again. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he found her waiting at the same airfield where it had all begun. She looked different. No makeup, no entourage, just jeans and a worn leather jacket. "You really lost everything for this," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I needed to. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm pretending anymore." They walked along the runway in silence, the smell of jet fuel and rain hanging in the air. The helicopter sat nearby, its blade still. It looked less like a machine and more like a monument. To both of them, Victoria turned to him. "I read everything. Your patents, your notes, what you tried to do for the military, saving lives, not building weapons." She paused. "I'm sorry I was part of what destroyed that." Daniel looked at her, the woman who had once been the symbol of everything he hated. But he saw something in her eyes now that he hadn't before, genuine remorse. And that was enough. "You can't change the past," he said. "But you can decide what kind of person you'll be in the story people tell after you're gone." Victoria nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why I came. To ask if there's a way to rebuild something right this time." Daniel hesitated, then extended his hand. "Then let's build something that gives instead of takes." In that moment, not as a CEO and not as a homeless man, they met as two human beings, both broken, both reborn from the wreckage of pride and injustice. Months later, a new project was announced. The Carter Hale Research Foundation, dedicated to developing safer, eco-friendly aircraft technology and funding scholarships for underprivileged students. It wasn't about redemption or publicity. It was about legacy. Daniel never sought to humiliate her. He didn't want revenge. What he wanted was balance, for the truth to live, and for others to never suffer what he did. As for Victoria, she never returned to corporate life. She spent her time working quietly with the foundation, teaching young entrepreneurs about ethics, leadership, and the cost of power. The world moved on from her scandal, but Daniel never forgot how the universe had turned her arrogance into humility, the same way it turned his pain into purpose. On the anniversary of the infamous airfield day, Daniel stood beside the Falcon X-1 last time. The aircraft had been donated to a museum with a plaque that read, "Designed by Daniel Carter, built for humanity." As he placed his hand on the cool metal surface, memories flooded back of laughter, betrayal, flight, and forgiveness. He smiled faintly, knowing that what once began as mockery had ended as meaning. He looked up at the sky, clear, open, infinite. It wasn't just a symbol of freedom anymore. It was proof that no matter how far someone falls, truth has wings strong enough to lift them again.